All right, so we're going to start today's session with a personal land acknowledgement statement before we get started. Hello, my name is Jennifer and my pronouns are she, her. I currently reside in Oromadani, Ontario, Canada, also known as Turtle Island, which is the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The territory that I live on is covered by the Williams Treaty of 1923, as well as the Lake Simcoe Purchase, also known as Treaty 16. My ancestors were settlers to Canada, and long before today, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. I recognize the contributions that Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community and our country as a whole. Over 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forced to attend residential schools here in Canada. Much harm was committed against Indigenous peoples within these schools, which has resulted in generational trauma that is still prevalent today. I feel a responsibility to help educate myself and others about the importance of this land and the history of the Indigenous peoples, and in particular to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and children across our country. As Timothy B. Tyson stated, if there is to be reconciliation, there first must be truth. Therefore, my commitments include that I will review the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I will forge partnerships with local Indigenous communities and organizations and support Indigenous artists and authors. I will also continue to educate myself as well as my children so that they too will stand for change and for a safe Canada for everyone. I am grateful for elders and those who are here to share their stories with us so that we may understand their experiences and work towards reconciliation. I vow to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And now I have the privilege of introducing our guest today, Dr. Anton Treuer, professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University. He's also the editor of the Oshakabewis Native Journal, which is the only academic journal of the Ojibwe language. Dr. Treuer has presented all over the US and Canada, as well as in other foreign countries. He has sat on many organizational boards and has received more than 40 prestigious awards and fellowships. He has many published works, including the book that we will be discussing today, The Cultural Toolbox, Traditional Ojibwe Living in the Modern World. Anton is on the governing board for the Minnesota State Historical Society, and in 2018, he was named Guardian of Culture and Lifeways and recipient of the Pathfinder Award by the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. Chi-miigwech, thank you for joining us today, Anton.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we really look forward to diving into some questions about your book here. Such an amazing guide. It was so easy to navigate through and read. And just wondering what really motivated you to write this book in the first place?
Oh man, I've had really throughout my entire adult life fallen in love with the Ojibwe language and culture. And I consider myself very lucky. I get to wear many hats. I work at a university, but I don't just live in an ivory tower. I kind of feel like I got one foot in the ivory tower and one in a wigwam, and have a large family. And as I've been navigating this space where, I find myself an unlikely candidate to be someone who's doing a lot to carry our culture, I still find myself in that role. My father wasn't Native at all. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant and Holocaust survivor. My mother is Ojibwe from a little village called Bena on the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. And her grandmother went to residential boarding school, and there was a break in the intergenerational transmission of our culture and our language. And so she was on a reclaiming journey of her own, even when I was a child. But it wasn't until I was an adult that I kind of stumbled into this life-altering journey with one of my elders, Archie Mosey, and eventually found myself in a position where I ended up officiating at drum ceremonies and various life ceremonies, funerals even. And this is a time of such unprecedented change for all humans. But if you can think about how fast things are changing for all humans, imagine being part of a smaller, kind of more marginalized cultural enclave surrounded by the sea of rapidly changing culture. And so the pace of change is even more formidable. And Archie Mosey, who I had mentioned, was born in 1901. His namesakes were veterans of the US Civil War. When I met him, he was in a little modern house watching WWF SmackDown on a modern TV, and think about the change just from his childhood and who was alive when he was a child, to my experience with him so much later in his life. And as we lose a lot of our great elders and culture and language carriers, our culture is under stress. And at the same time that's a reality, we have the benefits of a higher level of interconnectivity. It's like blessings and curses, technology. And as someone who's written a lot of history books and done a lot of language publication, I just can see the power of a publication to bridge some of those cultural divides. In both the US and Canada, over half of the tribal population lives off res and are hungry for connecting to their culture and community. And so books can do some things, and I have high hopes that it would be able to do that. At the same time, there's some things books can't do. They can't replace a genuine cultural experience, or we can't walk around our elders and go get all our information from a book. Some things have to be experienced, and there are some limitations to what we can do with a book. And there are other challenges too, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about. But ultimately, I feel like it's a way to leverage, to invite people into what we do in my family and how we try to live our culture today in this crazy, modern, quickly changing world. And so I just see it as an opportunity and a way to leverage information and share it more widely.
And you just touched on how you share about your family so much in the book. And I just wanted to mention that in Ontario today, it's actually Family Day. And so we think it's so special that we get to talk to you a bit about your family through some of the experiences that you touched on in your book while we're celebrating Family Day together.
That's great.
Yeah. And also, I know you just touched on your relationship a little bit with Archie Mosey. If you could just expand on that a little bit, how that relationship was so important to shaping who you are today, both in your professional and your personal life.
Yeah, I think, there's a great Carl Jung quote, when two people connect, if there's any genuine connection at all, both are transformed, and when I met Archie, I could almost back it up and say, by the time I finished high school, my plan was simply to get out of town and never come back. I, kind of naively thought there was a way to escape the brambled racial borderland of my youth and things like that. Went to college at Princeton University, where I was, I believe, the first Ojibwe person to even attend school there. And all of a sudden, there's nothing like leaving home to make you appreciate what you just left behind. And I was just starving to get back home and never leave. And, I had a great experience at college, but by the time I finished, I really just wanted to learn about my language and culture, and abandoned other plans I had for being a lawyer, politician, something like that. And I thought, well, I might be good at that, but I think I'd be pretty miserable trying. So I got to do something different. And Archie Mosey was just kind of a famous spiritual leader. He wasn't even from my res. He was a, couple reses over from me. And and this is even before the days of cell phones. So I just hopped in a car. I drove over there, took a phone book out and started looking up Moseys. And the first one I caught was his son, who was hazing me like, who do you think you are? This seems a little weird, but eventually thought, I might be real enough, and sent me over to Archie's house. And when I went in the door, I remember being nervous and I had some gifts. I didn't know what to do. And he's, watching, all-star wrestling and laughing very loudly. And I was expecting him to be like praying with a pipe or something when I came in the door. And he stopped, he looked at me and he shut off the TV and he said, "Oh, I've been waiting for you." And I remember thinking, well, how could you be waiting for me? You don't even know who I am. But he had a dream about someone, and I must have looked like the person in his dream. And he just kind of opened the door, literally, and, in a spiritual sense too. So, I ended up sleeping on his couch and staying at his house and being his gopher, like go for this, go for that, drive him here, drive him there, haul in the pipes and the drums and things like that. And I was just so thrilled to be in the room. This is kind of what I was hoping for. I went through ceremony with him and things too, but it's kind of like Forrest Gump. After that, every time I went somewhere, I was running, but I never thought it would take me anywhere. It was kind of like that for me with culture, where I just wanted to soak it in. I wasn't trying to be anybody or do anything so much. And I shared in the book the story when after he had passed away, and they had this memorial feast for him. And I remember driving over there thinking, I wonder who's going to talk at this feast, because he did all the talking. And his daughter, who had like the perfect mean Indian look, even though she was super sweet. She'd always kiss me on both cheeks and stuff like that. But yeah, she could look scary if you didn't know her. In any event, I came in there and I was like, "Betsy, who's going to talk at the feast?" And she said, "Well, you are. I'm going to see if you're paying attention with anything that my dad's been sharing with you all these years." And stuffed tobacco in my hand, and had a pouch of tobacco for all these requests. I had 13 of them there between all my fingers, and two big fists, looked just crazy. And I remember just being terrified. So I stepped up and I kind of pulled it off, and I glanced over at Betsy and she gave me one little nod. And that was that. I was busy as a cultural practitioner, even though that had never been a goal,
Can you explain a bit for anybody who might be watching who doesn't understand what a tobacco offering is?
Oh,
The
sure.
significance of that.
Yeah. So across many tribes in both the United States and Canada, tobacco is a really important part of culture. So, if we're going to harvest anything, a plant, an animal, a fish, a bird, if we're going to even ask something of our fellow humans or make a prayer, instead of just taking those things, we're supposed to make a reciprocal offering. So tobacco is, culturally, across the Great Lakes and plains, considered that reciprocal offering. So, someone would place some tobacco by a plant in order to harvest it, would use tobacco either as an offering in their hand, placed by a tree, in the water, in a fire, or smoked in a pipe for a prayer offering. And, really the growing range of what we would consider the Virginia leaf tobacco really just extends to the southern Great Lakes. So in much of the US and Canada, people would actually harvest the inner bark of red willow or red osier, which is a form of dogwood, and use that as the tobacco plant, even though it isn't scientifically tobacco, but it was used for the tobacco offering.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you so much, Anton. I know you mentioned earlier a little bit about, your hunger to really learn more about your culture and really dive into, kind of gaining back some of that was lost. You mentioned in your book that there is a hunger for Ojibwe people to access reliable, approachable, and usable cultural information and experiences. So I'm just wondering how you feel that your book helps to meet that need.
Yeah, so it's complicated to try to share about culture in an Ojibwe context for a number of reasons. So one of the reasons is that there's not really any such thing as the Ojibwe culture. It's more like the Ojibwe are a group of interconnected language, dialects, and culture regions. And for both better and worse, you know, one of the things that's cool about Ojibwe culture is that there's a high level of individual spiritual empowerment. Like if I have a dream that I'm running a sweat lodge ceremony and the door opens to the east, because that's where the sun rises, and there's certain colors for each of the four directions, that's what I do. And if my neighbor has a dream that they're running a sweat lodge ceremony, but the door opens to the south because the sun tracks across the south half of the sky and it's where warmth and life come from, and they have totally different colors associated with the directions, that's what they do. And so unlike something like, within a Catholic tradition where you have a church and a pope and all kinds of rule books, not just a Bible, but all kinds of guidance from the church that says, here's how you do something, the Ojibwe don't have that. So the nice part is anybody can be the most important somebody, and everyone's empowered in their own spiritual experience. What's complicated is that no one can say this is the way, because there may be variations or different ways that people have of doing any kinds of ceremonies. So what I did is, instead of saying this is the Ojibwe culture, I just said, this is how my family lives our Ojibwe culture. And I think some of the things that work for that is I know myself and I know my family and what we do. And I'm not telling anybody else, I'm not making a Bible for Ojibwe ways or something like that. I'm just sharing experiences. And I think people relate to story and to other people's experiences. It's not academic, anthropological language, and it's authentic. So, I think all of that makes it easier for people to read, understand, relate to. It takes the judgment and out of it, or the shaming for what someone didn't teach or someone didn't learn out of it. Just says, hey, this is just where this family's at this point in time. And, I hope people can relate to that.
Yeah, for sure. I love how you put in there the importance of storytelling as a way to really share your culture, and I believe that is just so powerful for so many people to be able to hear stories and to learn culture in that way. I know you mentioned it a little bit more throughout your book too, and the importance of that. Which I really resonated while reading it. You mentioned a little bit earlier as well about namesakes, and in your book, it really hones in on the importance of those namesakes. Do you feel comfortable sharing some information about the namesakes that selected your names of Macoons, Little Bear, and Wagosh Fox, and the influences these namesakes have had on you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. There's so much to say, and probably even beyond our time for our conversation today about all of the details, although there's a lot more in the books too. But for those who maybe aren't as familiar, first of all, naming is different in Ojibwe culture than in some other cultures. A namesake doesn't just give a name, but they also establish a relationship, kind of like a godparent in some Christian traditions, where they're a spiritual guide and role model and things like that. And even the words speak a lot to it. So ni yao means my body in Ojibwe, and ni yawe means my name's sake. And so the reason is because we think of our body as a cup that is temporary housing for our soul. So it's not like we have souls, it's more like we are souls, and we have bodies for a little while. We're not, humans looking for a spiritual experience. We are spirits having a temporary human experience. If I were to give a name to someone, I'm taking something out of my cup, my dreams, visions, whatever, putting it into someone else's. So this is Niao and this is Nioe. My first namesake was the late Clement Bolio. He was a veteran of World War I. He was pretty old when I was a kid. And he had given me the name Makuns. And in Ojibwe culture, the bear, Makuns means little bear. And, the bear is a keeper of medicines and a protector. And this is kind of the body of teachings that he gave with my first name. He passed away when I was a little kid, and sometimes, and even with my own children, they've had several namesakes. So if one has passed away, there are others who are there for that relationship. And I just felt a strong need for, spiritual and cultural mentorship and guidance. So I went to Mary Roberts, who was a spiritual leader from Roseau River First Nation in kind of on the Ontario-Manitoba border, on the Manitoba side. And, she was really, really great. She had a vision about a wagush, which is a fox, and, really had a pretty detailed story and was telling me, this is what you need to do with your life. And your life will be like that of a fox. You will be busy. You're going to be running and scampering, providing for your family, things like that, which is kind of how things have gone for me. But, I really treasured her advice and guidance with a lot of things in my life. And she pops up in the book in a few places too.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I was also going to mention, I know that you mentioned Anna Gibbs several times throughout your book. So just also wondering what the impact she's had on you and your family.
Oh, man. So Anna Gibbs, for those who haven't had a chance to meet her, she was really a one-of-a-kind dynamic personality. I think for most of her life, most of the visible markers of her identity were things that were used to kind of doubt her. She's a full-blooded Native woman, both being a full-blooded Native and, being a woman and having a physical disability where one leg was longer than the other. So she kind of walked with a gait like this, big Coke bottle, Indian Health Service glasses, and, but it was just amazing to me. By the time she died, I think everybody wanted to know what she knew. There were, I don't know, all over 1,000 people at her funeral, and a big horse-drawn caravan going out to the gravesite, and people, even as the caravan's coming by, people are pouring out of the houses, watching and joining, and it was crazy to see. But she, in many ways, represented cultural continuity with her deep knowledge of our language, culture, and ways. But she also represented cultural change. It had been predominantly men, in fact, only men in her community who had officiated at traditional Ojibwe funerals. She was the first woman in her community to do that. And some people, again, doubted her, looked down on her for doing that. She was representing cultural change at the same time that she was representing cultural continuity. But I thought she was brave, and I thought, and she was hilarious. She was somebody who, I relied on for advice and mentoring and coaching on all kinds of things. And she relied on me too, for everything from chauffeur duties to, helping her out in any number of ways. We ended up working together on a lot of language projects. So she was a contributor on some of these Ojibwe kids books and video shorts and all kinds of things. They ended up naming the inaugural immersion school up at Red Lake after her. So she's pretty revered in Ojibwe country. And, I shared a story in there about my last child's birth. And, I thought I was a pro at the dad role in like a child coming into the world by the time she came, because we have 9 children. And, I was like calling on the phone, and within 10 minutes, my wife's sister and mom show up at the hospital, and I got babysitters at the house, and we're rolling in there. I've got like an Ojibwe birthing go bag. So, we have medicine for the baby's first bath and all these different things. And we get there and like nothing went the way we thought it would go. And there were complications, and my wife had to get a cesarean section and session. And then we were worried about the baby, who came out, breathing and everything, but jaundiced and like slow and lethargic. And it was even like that for months. She was just slow to gather, put on weight and take to nursing. I remember calling Anna. I was like, Anna, there's something wrong with the baby. She's not nursing. She looks all yellow. And like, what do we do? And she said, well, don't you worry about anything. You know what to do. Go put some tobacco out. Make that medicine for your baby's first bath. Take that placenta and put it in the woods by a maple tree. It'll give her a long life. Don't let those medical people do experiments on it. And she said, she'll be fine. She'll be more than fine. I already had the dream for her name, and so I was like, oh, okay. I went about, doing all of those things. It's just so powerful, every part of it. Like, people have sometimes asked me about parenting advice. And I was like, man, all I'm trying to do is not mess my kids up too bad. You got one shot at parenting. It's terrifying. But, the biggest piece of advice is falling in love with your kid. When you fall in love with your kid, you'll be motivated to figure the rest of it out. Something like doing that baby's first bath, and you're the one who's combing the vernix out of her hair, and you're the first one to notice whatever, if she's got a birthmark or if there's hair on her butt or whatever.
Yeah.
You fall in love with your kid, and then that motivates you to figure the rest of it out. And so Anna ended up being her namesake. She was namesake for a number of my kids, and gave her a really awesome, empowered name. Chi Ogima B'nai Sikwe, was big boss eagle woman, had this vision about eagles all along her body and shoulders and head, and she was like larger than life in this dream. And that was it. Like right after the naming ceremony, my daughter woke up and she was laughing all day and crying all day, and and putting on weight and bossing everyone around. Even today, she grew into that name. Like, I just felt like the Cultural Toolbox awakened her, so even today, like when we first sent her to school, I was like telling my wife, I said, I think this will go all right as long as the teacher does exactly what she's told, because the kid has that kind of personality.
Yeah.
It's always fun.
Oh, I love that, because it really shows how, a sense of community is so important, and to have, namesakes there and to have elders there that are helping to support, as opposed to like in a lot of other cultures, there may be where it's, just the parents are there to raise their own kids, like such a nice sense of community. And in your book also, and we're educators, in your book, you touch on the importance of educators being there to support the children as they're going through school. And not every child is the same, and to understand what each child needs. And you gave some examples about your son, Isaac. Did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to. That kid is such a joy and was such a challenge. And I just felt like, thank God for the Cultural Toolbox to help us all through that experience. He's really amazing. And, almost just back this up or preface it by saying, for all human beings throughout all human cultures, through all time until quite recently, we all had earth-based worldviews. We all, survived because of our connections to each other and community. And it's only been like the past 10,000 years that any of that's changed for anybody. And some of the changes are at great odds with our most fundamental wiring, instincts, and needs as human beings. It's like even earlier when we're talking about the importance of story. Well, we survived because we were in relationship to other people, because someone loved us enough to protect us or provide for us or whatever. And it's only been very recently that we've said, no, what matters and what defines you are your individual accomplishments as a solo person. What matters most is you having more money than somebody else, as opposed to your ability to give it all away to somebody else, in these sorts of things. And I think it's very much at odds with how we are fundamentally wired and some of our most important emotional, psychological and spiritual needs. So, Isaac, oh man, there are a lot of stories, and I dropped some good zingers on him in the childhood because he was so outrageous, like a very intense kid, intensely funny from the earliest age, and physical and dynamic. But yeah, I mean, even when he was 2, he was like pushing his little 1-year-old brother down who's learning how to toddle and goes, "I take time out." I was like, "Yes, you will, baby, time out." There's always something like that. And I have a stack of like discipline reports from when he was in childhood program because they're so good. Like, today your son said some derivation of the word "but" 300 times. Butt talks, butt crack, help. So I was like, save file. There were just so many of these things. Oh, so anyways, I won't give you all of those stories, but there's a lot of good ones in there. And at the same time that he was hilarious and fun and dynamic, like this was the kind of kid who he could sit still in a deer stand for 5 hours in a row, but he couldn't sit still at a desk for 5 minutes, and it was always a challenge for everybody and for him. And I think a lot of times what we do in education is we have a very narrow set of prescribed behaviors and a very narrow set of academic aptitudes, and if someone doesn't succeed at those, then we treat them like they're not a success. And I think that poses great frustrations for teachers who are trying to teach everybody, but are only given permission to use a narrow range of tools, and it's frustrating for students who don't fit in the box. And this kid did not fit in the box. And, to me, like, I don't know, just one more example of his childhood stuff. Like he was punking his siblings as a, preteen. And I was like, all right, quit punking your siblings. I'm going to leave you here. You're old enough to be home alone. He wouldn't stop. So I was like, all right, you get to stay, come on, everybody else, we're going to drum ceremony. So we took off to drum ceremony. And like an hour later, boom, he like bursts open the door to the drum ceremony and comes strutting in there. And I was like, how did you get here? Did you hitchhike? He was like, nope, I ran. It was like 10 miles. 10 miles. So then am I supposed to be like mad or like proud? And he was always like that. And so I think in a former time, he would have simply just been the most promising young warrior in the village. And these sorts of, personality traits, a little, a slight disregard for the rules maybe, but at the same time, a strong spirit and intense physicality, no one's going to hold me down. I'm going to get where I want to go, no matter what the circumstances or what I got to do to get there. Like that stuff was awesome. And so at home in the woods. But yeah, you should have seen him like test day, for schools. And they're like, yeah, make sure your kid's on time, make sure they're well fed, make sure they're well rested. And he gets there and it's like a 3-hour test. And he's like, are you finished? Woo, let's go. And the teacher's like, oh, off to the principal's office. Education plan. Let's go. We came there. And I just remember looking at the tools and, you're both in education, so I'm sure you've seen them. It's like, well, you have a fine young man here. He's very strong spirited. So we'd like to catch him being good. Every time he's good, can you sign this permission slip? He can get a treat out of the treat jar, and we'll give him gold stickers when he gets enough. He can, receive a reward. And we've got card flips, every color of the rainbow. They start at green, and as he kind of drops down, we want to get him away from red so he can go back up. And I was just looking at that stuff and I said, I'm not sure that works.
Yeah.
Because, in the mainstream, we value individualism and competition. Like how many board games do we have where no one wins and nobody loses? Or, or sports where nobody wins and nobody loses? There actually are some things, but they're kind of rare. There are some board games where everybody gets off the sinking islands or they don't, or things like that, that foster collaboration and stuff like that, but they're less common. and also materialism. And so that's what the toolbox was, right? You compete with other people, you get more stickers, you get treats, you distinguish yourself from others, and I was like, this stuff, that might work for like some learners, but that's not going to work for this kid. He's steeped in something completely different. And so I use the example in there, just sharing about our first kill ceremony, like when someone comes of age. We do this for both boys and girls. But when somebody has their first successful deer hunt, the ancient custom used to be to cook the whole deer, invite over everybody from the wigwam village, and they'd eat it in one fell swoop. We're like everybody else, working jobs and going to schools. And so we have a big feast, but we won't cook the whole deer. We'll invite over aunts, uncles, grandmas, female namesakes, male namesakes, both. And we will have a prayer. And instead of just eating, we ritually feed the successful hunter. So in this case, Isaac's name was Bejago Benes, Lone Thunderbird. So take a spoon of the food and offer it, Bejago Benes. And he refuses the first bite and says, no, I'm thinking about children who don't have enough to eat. Ah, okay, put it back. And again, Bejago Benes. No, I'm thinking about my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Ah, okay, put it back. Bejago Benes. No, I'm thinking about my family, my community, people who came here today to support me. Ah, okay. Bejago Benes. And then you can eat. And then we would say, well, Bejago Benes, today you changed your life. Up until today, you were what we call a dependent. You depended on all the people in this room to provide all your food. And there they are, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. But today now you're providing for all of us. And that's what it means to be an adult. And you have a special power now, and you'll have it for the rest of your life. It's the power to gather resources. You'll have it when you hunt, when you fish, when you gather, you'll have it when you get a job. So when you use your power, think about children who don't have enough, elders who can't get it for themselves, your family, your community. Then they take the rest of the, like packaged up venison from his first kill and give it away. So impoverished, but rich. And that kid internalized that stuff more, it was unbelievable to me. So one time I had a friend complaining, oh, my back, I can't get out in the woods. And, he didn't say anything. He's about 16. He went out and harvested a deer and cleaned it up, went to my friend's house and filled up his freezer. My friend was like, wow, I didn't know people remembered that. And so one of the takeaways for me about these things is that what's in the cultural toolbox, it reflects our values as a people, but it also shapes our values as a people. And so I had to talk to the school and say, all right, your toolbox is in totally different stuff. We need to speak his cultural language. And they listened. And so we had him like going down to the younger kids and telling them stories and, leading groups of kids to go to the, gym and burn off some steam. And he finished school unmedicated, still full of swagger for life. He's a successful adult now, but it was only possible by speaking his language, cultural language, instead of just crushing him and forcing him into a box that he would never fit in.
I think that is so important for educators to realize that like all children have different gifts to offer. And as they're growing, they'll develop into their own people. And that, yeah, exactly. We can't just fit every child into a box and tick it. Like I'm even reflecting on my own kids, and even my husband, his report cards said the same thing. If he goes and looks at his report cards, where it's like, it's, talking too much. But then you get into, university and college, and it's like, okay, everybody, why isn't it, we need you to talk now. And so it makes it very difficult because, instead of just trying to honor people's gifts that they have to bring, there needs to be where, the parents and the educators come together to discuss and see what fits best to be able to educate children in the best way for them, right?
Right.
I wanted you to touch a little bit too, if you can, on your mother and your daughter, and how, so it was your mother Peggy, right? She went by Peggy Margaret Treuer, and your daughter Mia. and how both of them, helped you in walking the red road. Because you made a
Mhm.
comment in your book about how your daughters schooled you in the importance of in the importance of forgiveness, communication, and the power of showing up. And
Yeah.
yeah, so if those two, if you could expand a little bit on the impact that they've had on you.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never met a human being, any age, any gender, any background, who was not my superior in some way. Like we all have something to teach, and we all have something to learn too. And yeah, it was really powerful for me writing this book too. My mother had passed away fairly recently, right at the start of the pandemic in March of 2020. And so when I was writing this, I was kind of processing, my whole relationship with my mom and things like that. And so I find writing, I don't think I've been dismissive of its power, like as a psychological tool or something like that. Even though I've been an author for a long time, but it is kind of like Dumbledore's pensieve, when you can lay your thoughts out and poke and prod them and see when we're ascribing meaning to things that wasn't there, or seeing things in a new light. And so it was like that for me doing some of this work. But um, I think throughout my childhood, the first, 10 years of my childhood, I have one brother who's just a year younger than me. So we were kind of, jokingly called Ojibwe twins, like 9 months and 10 minutes apart or something. But we grew up real close to one another. And at that point in time, my mother was kind of on her own life trajectory. She'd come straight out of Bina, had met one professional Native person ever. That was the school nurse, became a nurse, and then thought, I got to do something about this, when she started working for the tribe's health program and ended up becoming the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And so that was all cooking, during my first 10 years of life. But while that was cooking, my mom was there all the time. We were always hunting, fishing, gathering. They were humble. My father was hitting the restart button. My mom was trying to find a pathway out of poverty, but we were always living the like everyday culture stuff, hunting, fishing, picking berries, making maple syrup and sugar. And so I always felt super rich and privileged. Like I had lots of time and attention with my parents. There was a big shift, at about age 9 to 10, as my mom got her law degree. My mom gave birth to a set of twins. So that I was 9 years older than my youngest brother and sister. And they flipped roles. My mom headed out and started a law practice. My dad stayed home with the babies. And it was cool and exciting and interesting watching my mom with powwow braids and sorrel boots go fight in the institutions of patriarchy and whiteness. But at the same time, I was like, it felt like somebody shut off the sun,
Yeah.
where I had this never ending attention from my parents. And all of a sudden, there were little babies taking all the attention, and my mom had a full-time career. And there were other things that went on in my folks' life. And so I think I had a hard time metabolizing all of that and understanding it and putting it into perspective. And then I got busy. I have a big family of my own, had dramas and challenges of my own. And so as as my mom aged and developed health problems, she had been a lifelong smoker. So she ended up having two cancer battles. She had a lung cancer. They basically took out one of her lungs and ran, chemo treatments, and she beat it, which is pretty unbelievable. Then she got a pancreatic cancer, some years later, and beat that. And I was by her side the whole time, praying for her, helping with ceremonies, helping shuffle her to and fro. And she had developed COPD and kind of had limited lung function. And so I just thought I was being a dutiful son, helping her out, bringing her to appointments, literally carrying her like, in my arms to the car, and, things like that. And it was, I saw that probably a little more as a duty, but still it felt like there was some distance between us. And I think I still felt very wounded, from some of that childhood stuff. And I remember when I finally was at one of our doctor's appointments, and they're like, yeah, there's an 18% chance that your mom will be here 3 years from now. You know, took her home, drove down the road, pulled over, just had a big cry. And I was like, this is real, man. I'm going to lose my mom. And, as I went home, all my kids are in the yard playing LARP, live action role play, like foam weapons, beating each other up. Had to haul them to the sugar bush to haul sap. And then my daughter, Mia, who is, she's 12 now, but I don't know, she's just so bright and intuitive and insightful. And so anyway, she's the only one who like catches me, and she's like, Dad, what's wrong? And I was like, oh, it's okay. I'm just a little worried about Grandma Peggy. She's like, can you take me to see her? I said, well, sure. And she went running in the garage and came out with an axe. And there's this thing in Ojibwe culture that we have a saying, Gishbin Wika Nizagakwa Gibimad Win Abojatun Giwagakwa. Like, if there's ever a bramble in your life, pick up your axe or hatchet. It's like a way of saying, if things ever get hard, pick up your ways. I was like, is she telling me to go cut wood, or is I like working, the spirits working through her to give me a message here? And we put some tobacco by a tree. We went to see my mom, and I don't know, my daughter just kept on me after that. Like, I want to see Peggy. Can we go bake over there? And my mom had a really tiny house. And so there wasn't room for my crazy horde of kids who just couldn't sit still anyways, most of them. But yeah, my daughter she was clever, and she would like to goad my mom into talking about politics, which my mom couldn't talk about Donald Trump without cursing. And so then my daughter would start laughing, and I'd cover her ears, and I would make her laugh. So they're like, and my mom knew how to play her grandkids, just like candy, popsicles, what do you need? And but through that, instead of just the duties, but all that extra time, I think things really thawed with my mom. And she started sharing stories, like, about her childhood, that she didn't really have a lot of great examples of what healthy parenting looked like. Her mom had been hauled off to residential boarding school. That was broken. It had to be rebuilt, and things like that. And, helped her with her will and paperwork and all these different kinds of things. And I finally understood that, like, this hurt I was carrying, that I thought was my mom wasn't loving me enough kind of stuff, that was so misguided on my part. And I didn't need her to be what she was when I was a little kid, constant companion, architect of my life. I just needed to know she loved me that much all this time. And of course she did. Of course she did. But it took my little kid persistently hauling me over there and all those conversations to, like, finally see what should have been obvious, but it wasn't. And, so that's when I was saying, like, my little kid was schooling me in the importance of just showing up, forgiveness. And so, the book is framed about seasons. Like, we have spring, summer, fall, winter, and there's seasons in a person's life, babies, young people, adults, elders. And so I write about my daughter and my mom in the winter chapter, the season of elderhood. And that's what they were teaching me, is about our season of aging and dying. And what a gift they've given.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Anton. Yeah, that part of the book, especially, just just was so touching, and thank you so much for sharing that with us today as well. You do talk a little bit about that season of elderhood, in that winter season. How important is it for people to listen to elders and to take their advice?
Oh yeah, I think elders are highly revered in Ojibwe culture. Even our words for elders, like Gitchiaya'a is our base word for an elder, and it literally means great being. Mindemuye, the word for an elderly woman, means one who holds things together and describes the role of the family matriarch. And to me, those things speak to the importance of elders and elderhood. And even when we pray, we'll pray for people to see all their seasons, to get to be an elder. If someone does good deeds for an elder, the elder might touch their head and touch the kid's head and say, Wabikwan Beji Kiminin, I'm giving you a white hair. And it's a blessing. It's a way of saying you get to be an elder too someday. You'll get there one good deed at a time. Keep going, one gray hair at a time. And I just feel like this is a very healthy message to give people. In mainstream cultures, we often tell people that you are most valuable when you're young. We tell men you are valuable when you're young because that's when you can earn money. And you're only sexually attractive when you're earning money and things like that. We tell women you are valuable if you are young and pretty, of childbearing age, because that's how you get a man and that's how you get success. So it's like patriarchy, sexism, ageism, like all of that. And of course, we torture ourselves trying to pretend that we're young forever. And how much money do we spend on facelifts and Botox injections and, plastic surgery? And we won't admit how old we really are. And we feel bad about ourselves when natural things happen to our bodies instead of seeing and feeling the beauty of each phase of life or wishing for those things. So I think it's really healthy to decenter that and to say there's a beauty in each age. Babies are beautiful, young people are beautiful, adults are beautiful, elders are beautiful. We should want all the beauties. We should want to see all the seasons. That's really important messaging for everybody. And yeah, I think decentering the ageism and patriarchy stuff that's so centered in a lot of mainstream thinking is really helpful and healing.
Yeah. I feel, like definitely there's a lot of pressure on people to, like you said, to look a certain way, to try to be youthful. And we were I'm gonna say it. You say it. We've both been noticing gray hairs. So I'll be like, oh, I'm getting more gray or white hair or whatever you want to say. And then Jen, same, she's like, oh, I don't really notice in your hair. I have a few. And then I read that part in your book and I'm like, I'm embracing the gray hairs because you know what? It is. You should love every part of life and you should see it as not everybody gets to get to this part in their life where they have gray hairs, and it should be something that you're celebrating that you're getting, to those parts in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I loved that part. So we just had one more question for you here. Is there anything that you feel like you learned through the process of writing this book?
Oh yeah, I learn all the time. I think even just what I was sharing about my mom, like as I was writing, I was putting perspective on it. As I was thinking, like when you think about those 4 seasons, it's kind of like, a circular thing. As we get to the, peak of old age, we become a little more childlike, like we're coming full circle, and so I was just thinking about cycles in, throughout the relationships in my family and how things have come full circle in so many different ways. All of my children have been receive the kinds of blessings and curses that only a father can bestow in terms of, my own empowerments and injuries and things like that. And so, I think it's something that really brought home to me the importance of poking and prodding the narratives that we tell ourselves, realizing that even when you look at something like, there's been a lot of attention lately in the US and Canada about residential boarding schools and all of the historical traumas and contemporary traumas, that have been associated with that. But we're more than the sum of our tragedies.
Yeah.
And we can acknowledge historical injustices and traumas, but we don't have to center them in our psychological fabric. We can heal from and move on from things without forgetting about them. I can acknowledge the pains that I experienced as a child and see the beauty still in the relationship and for example, the love that my mom carried for me. And so I think some of what I learned is about, even though we can't just make everything up for ourselves, that we have a lot more empowerment than we allow ourselves to exercise with regard to healing from all this mountains of thousands of years of humans mistreating each other individually and collectively, and that there's so much in our cultural toolbox that is of benefit, especially I'm thinking for Ojibwe people who, that's their cultural patrimony, but for everybody from the outside looking in too, to think about like, what parts of our individual and collective cultures should we center, should we hold up? What values do we hold dear? What does it mean? We're confronted with choices all the time. In my life, like I code switch so I can do whiteness really well. Check out my office here. You know what I mean? Individualism, there it is. Right. And so like I can do that, but just because I can do that, should that be how I build my whole life? And so on the other side there's like pictures of my kids everywhere on this side, all the other stuff on that side. But you can see some of them back here, maybe, pictures of family.
Oh yeah, nice.
But so like, what do we center? What do we hold up? We become what we do. We become who we hang out with. And so, it's an honor and a privilege for me, but I have some choices. I can spend time in that cultural space at the service of other people and subordinate chasing dollar bills or putting more stuff there to those things if I choose, although I will be applauded if I do more of that. But what really matters the most? What matters most to me, to my family, to my community, to the Manitug, the spirits that we all would like to feel closer to and be more acquainted with. And so I think for all of us, regardless of the particular culture path that we happen to be on, or the, usually mathematical equation to what's in our heritage toolbox, that we have options and choices, and we don't just have to, replicate colonization, whether that's in our individual lives, how we run a school, a government, we can do things differently. And so I think, it was a good reminder and learning about how to gain perspective on things and think about what's next.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with us. Again, the Cultural Toolbox, an excellent book. I think, within schools, they should be reading this, educating themselves. It like you said, Anton, it's a read that, you can get through easily, and it goes through the seasons in such a beautiful way. As it's, educating about your experience with your family, right? There can be all different experiences for different people, but thank you so much for meeting with us today to share about those experiences with your family. Again, it's Family Day in Ontario, so it's such a nice day to be able to discuss with you. So Chi McWitch.
Yeah, Chi McWitch.
Miigwech, thank you so much.
If you don't want to miss any of our upcoming videos, make sure that you hit the subscribe button below as well as the notifications. And you can also visit our website, chaptersforchange.com, for educational resources and to see what we're up to. See you soon.